9 creepy unsolved mysteries that took place at rest stops. When you're traveling on a long road trip, a rest stop can provide a much-needed break and an opportunity to recharge your batteries. Unfortunately, because they are often situated in isolated locations where help is many miles away, rest areas are not always the safest places in the world. Here are some creepy, harrowing stories that have taken place at rest stops, many of which involve travelers becoming the victims of an unsolved mystery. 1. The disappearances of Shayna and Shasha Henson. Shayna and her younger sister, Shasha Henson, departed with their mother, Kimula Henson, from their family's residence in Portland, Oregon on April 4, 2001. They planned to travel to British Columbia, Canada with Kimula's friend, Christina Meyer, and a man Meyer introduced as her husband, Curtis. Stephen Kirkpatrick, the girl's father and Kimula's boyfriend, told authorities that he and Kimula never met Curtis prior to April 2001. Meyer's husband was actually Frank Ehering, who was a fugitive from Missouri. Photos of Kimula, Meyer and Ehering are posted below this case summary. Ehering was wanted after allegedly attempting to murder his former wife. Ehering reportedly led a group of Satanists in Missouri and Meyer was allegedly a member. It has been established that Kimula and her daughters spent the night of April 5 at the Shasta Lodge in Redding, California with Meyer and Ehering. They apparently stopped in Sacramento, California during the day to allow Kimula to pick up her birth certificate. It is believed that Meyer and Ehering may have convinced her she needed the document to enter Canada. There has been no sign of the children since that time. Ehering and Meyer were discovered at a rest area in Collier County, Florida on April 20, 2001. Meyer had been killed by a gunshot wound to the temple. Ehering was seriously wounded from a gunshot wound to the head. He died in a hospital shortly thereafter. Authorities determined that Ehering shot himself and his girlfriend in a murder-suicide. Ehering left behind letters detailing the couple's plan to steal Kimula's birth certificate. Meyer had assumed Kimula's identity in Las Vegas, Nevada shortly after they met Kimula and her children in Oregon. Kimula's remains were discovered near Nixon, Nevada on April 28, 2001. She had been beaten in the head and shot to death. Authorities believe Ehering and Meyer were responsible for her murder. An extensive search of the area produced no clues as to the whereabouts of Kimula's daughters. Testing was done on a blood-stained hatchet found in Meyer and Ehering's car. The blood was identified as Kimula's. Neither Sasha nor Shayna's blood was present. Authorities believe that Meyer and Ehering traveled to Florida alone during April 2001. Motel receipts indicate that the girls were not accompanying them at the time. Shayna and Sasha's car seats have never been recovered and their birth certificates are missing. Authorities do not know if Meyer and Ehering harmed the children or sold them to other individuals. Shayna and Sasha's cases remain unsolved. 2. The Wright City rest area torso. A decade before her disappearance never became a mystery to police. It was a body, decapitated, dismembered and dumped at a Wright City rest stop, that flummoxed investigators. Deanna Denise Howland was a Belleville native whose troubles started early on. By her 30s, Howland was hanging out around the Metro East, prostituting herself, using drugs and detached from her relatives. Police say that may be why the 35-year-old Alton woman wasn't reported missing, when she vanished sometime in 2004. On Tuesday, investigators announced that recent DNA tests had linked the two cases on opposite sides of the river. The headless, limbless torso found in 2004 at a rest stop along Interstate 70 belonged to Howland. "This has been haunting me for the last 12 years, said former Warren County Coroner Roger Mozzie, now the county's presiding commissioner. "It's the only body I've never been able to identify and it's cost me a lot of sleep. There's nothing more frustrating than having someone under your care that you don't know who it is." The woman's torso was found at the rest stop on June 28, 2004. She was found down a small hill in a remote part of the rest stop, along a circle drive that was primarily used as a picnic area. Because the remains had not decomposed, police believe she had not been dead for long, perhaps for only hours, when she was discovered. Investigators believe she was killed somewhere else and dumped out of a vehicle. She was wearing only a black bra. Her identity remained a mystery. Among the only clues were scars from an appendectomy and a cesarean section. Investigators checked missing person reports, but found no match. Howland hadn't been reported missing yet. Police at one point interviewed a suspected serial killer who was being held by authorities in Alabama. Later, they said they believed a spouse or boyfriend might be responsible for the death. Police found a knife in a storm sewer that they said might have been used to dismember the body, but without a name for the victim. The investigation apparently went nowhere. Eventually the case went cold. Howland was married more than once and went by different names. Police said her maiden name was Deanna Barker. She also went by Deanna Kinnear and Deanna Froelich. Court records say she was born in Belleville, married in 1991, and divorced 4 years later. She had at least 2 children. Family members of Howland couldn't be reached or didn't want to talk. Records show about 24 criminal cases in Madison County beginning in 1996, including drug and paraphernalia possession, prostitution and solicitation. The last criminal charge listed in Madison County court records was a March 2004 charge of a pedestrian walking on the highway. Ferguson Captain Dan DeCarly, commander of the Major Case Squad of Greater St. Louis, said Howland lived a very transient lifestyle and was estranged from her family. She was known to hang out in Granite City and East St. Louis in addition to the Alton area. She wasn't reported missing until last year, authorities said. It's not clear what triggered that report at that time. Information about her was posted in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons database, which said she was last seen in the Alton area on May 11, 2004. Meanwhile, in 2014, Warren County Sheriff's Lieutenant Matt Schmutz had reopened the torso case. At some point, investigators in Madison County got information that caused them to contact Warren County about a possible link between Howland's missing person case and the unidentified torso. It's not clear what that information was, and authorities declined to discuss specifics. After sharing information, authorities compared DNA from the torso to samples from some of Howland's relatives. Warren County Sheriff Kevin Harrison said his department received test results March 10 confirming the torso was Howland. The identification resulted from 2 investigators getting together, sharing what probably seemed like nothing, and it absolutely was the right information, Harrison said. Now, police hope they may finally be able to solve the mystery of how she died and who dumped her remains in Warren County. We want to focus on who she is and where she had been, Major Jeff O'Connor of the Major Case Squad said Tuesday as the DNA results were announced. We are looking for anything. I am sure somebody out there has some information about this. 3. The murder of Xavier Baligant. July 19, 2011, Belgian Xavier Baligant, 29, was shot to death. Mr. Baligant, divorced, was driving home to the town of Pont-de-Sales in Belgium after a camping holiday in the Ardèche department of the French region of Rhône-Alpes. France is divided into regions and each region into departments which in turn are divided into communes. On the rear seat of Mr. Baligant's car were seated his 2 children, aged 7 and 5. The 3 still had over 186 miles, 300 kilometers, to drive. And once they were on the A31 toll road, the 2 children fell asleep on the rear seat. When Mr. Baligant was nearing the town of Colombie-les-Belles beyond which the motorway was free, he pulled up in the Malvax rest area. It was going on for 2 in the morning and the rest area, which consisted of just a public convenience and a phone booth, was quiet. Traffic moving in the other direction had another rest area, that of Favras. Across the motorway, 24 trucks were parked in the 2 rest areas, their drivers asleep in their berths. At around 2 a.m. an employee of the motorway operating company APRR, Autoroutes Paris-Rhône, patrolling the motorway heard shots. He thought they came from the direction of the Malvax and Favras rest areas and immediately drove in that direction. He found the lifeless body of a man lying in front of the toilet in the Malvax rest area. He had been shot to death. On the rear seat of a car parked nearby, 2 small children lay asleep. They would later tell the investigators that their dad had told them that he was pulling up to go to the toilet but that they must stay in the car and sleep. With the arrival of the APRR man, some of the truck drivers were awakened by the patrol car's flashing light, and came over to see what was going on. The others had to be awakened later by gendarmes. Not one of the 24 had heard shots. The tests on the hands of all for gunpowder residue were negative. Mr. Baligant had been shot 4 times. 3 shots were aimed at his chest. The 4th, fired from above him, in other words he was on the ground, had hit him in the chin, traveled through his head and had exited through the top of the skull. The autopsy would show that the first of the 3 chest shots had been the fatal one. The final shot told the police that the killers wanted to make certain that Mr. Baligant was dead and unable to talk. Today the investigators believe that another vehicle had pulled up in the rest area at the same time as Mr. Baligant and an attempted carjacking had resulted. When Mr. Baligant had refused to hand over the keys of his car, the carjacker had shot him dead. He had injuries to his hands, which meant that there had been some degree of physical violence before the carjacker had started shooting. Then, after having shot Mr. Baligant and getting to his victim's car, and seeing that there were 2 sleeping children on the rear seat, the killer had raced off in his own car, probably one that was old and in poor condition, and stolen, and which he had planned to abandon. Or, if there were 2 or more carjackers, and there had not been 2 children in Mr. Baligant's car, one would have driven off in Mr. Baligant's car. The latter had left the keys in the ignition. In that month of July there had been several carjackings in car parks in Paris's more upper-class arrondissements. The modus operandi was always the same. The carjacker would threaten the car owner with a firearm, take the keys of his car and his credit card, and having obtained the PIN code and having withdrawn a large amount of money, would lock the car owner in the boot of his car to let him out only when out in the countryside. The cars were not found. The police believed that they were cleaned. Registration plates were changed, and the cars were driven across the European Union's open borders into Eastern Europe and especially to Albania, where crime has reached endemic levels. There has been speculation in the British media that Mr. Baligant's murderer was also that of Iraqi-born Saad al-Hili, 50, his wife Iqbal, 47, and her mother Sahalia, 74, and that of Frenchman Sylvain Mollier, 45, on a lay-by close to the town of Chivelin in the Upper Savoy, Haute-Savoie, region of France on September 5, 2012. The Chivelin shooting, after almost a year, still also remains unsolved. 4. The disappearance of David Lovely. In August 1985, David Lovely, 19, was traveling from California to Massachusetts on a cross-county move with his mother, Jackie Abbott, and his 18-year-old sister, Allison Lovely. Allison and Jackie were driving the yellow Ryder truck, and David was riding his motorcycle. Jackie and Allison checked on David every 30 miles. The motorcycle began having issues in Wyoming, so David told his family he would drive on to the next exit to find a gas station in the hope there would be a mechanic available. They agreed to meet at the next rest stop. David never showed. Jackie and Allison spent the night in the Ryder truck hoping David would catch up to them. Jackie phoned her sister, who said she spoke with David on August 5. He told his aunt his bike broke down in Fort Bridger, Wyoming. He had slept along the side of the highway and pushed his bike 3 miles up the road to the Bingo truck stop, now a Travel Centers of America truck stop. David met a rough-looking man on a Harley Davidson at the truck stop who fixed his bike and got it running again. Initially, David was scared of this man, but the guy was harmless, according to David. David told his aunt he was going to ride on to Rock Springs to meet up with his mother and sister and that he would call when he got there. However, he never called his aunt or showed up in Rock Springs when his family arrived there. Jackie and Allison drove on and stayed in Nebraska for a few nights, hoping they would find David there. They asked around to see if anyone had seen him, but no one had. The two decided to keep on driving, believing that David had gone on ahead of them and was on his way to Massachusetts. David never arrived in Massachusetts. Jackie checked with his friends, but they had not heard from him. Jackie phoned the police, but they were of little help. After all, David was an adult and could go missing if he wanted to. Plus, he disappeared out of state, making it tougher to get one agency to cooperate. On August 14, 1985, David's motorcycle was found on an isolated dirt road off South Baxter Road in Sweetwater County, Wyoming by a couple who was camping in the area. They called the police. When police arrived, the bike still had a half tank of gas and the keys were in the ignition. David's books rested neatly against his bike and a blue knapsack was on the ground. The couple told police that a few days before they saw someone with long hair drive out of the area where David's bike was found. However, they could not make out if the person was male or female, but they were able to describe the motorcycle, saying it was large, turquoise and chrome, and had luggage or bedroll on the back. A large ground search began, but nothing came from it and David was never found. Police never investigated the bingo truck's stop to find out who the man on the Harley Davidson was who fixed David's motorcycle. David was born with congenital defects and underwent extensive operations as a child that left him with a large scar across his abdomen, below his rib cage. He had excessive amounts of scar tissue and infections which caused him to be hospitalized for months. He was forbidden from playing sports because too strong of a blow to the stomach could cause serious complications. His family believes that if he got into a fight before he disappeared and was hit in the stomach, the blow could have accidentally killed him. After almost 32 years, Jackie and Allison continue the search for David. 5. The murder of Father Reynaldo Rivera. In 1988, Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment about two separate crimes involving Catholic priests, which investigators suspected might be related. On August 7, 1982, Father Reynaldo Rivera answered a phone call to the rectory at St. Francis Cathedral in Santa Fe, Mexico. The caller said his name was Michael Carmelo and requested a priest to administer last rites to his dying grandfather. Carmelo asked Father Rivera to meet him at an isolated rest stop out of town. Rivera left the rectory to meet Carmelo and never returned. 3 days later, Rivera's body was found on a deserted road 3 miles from the rest stop. He had been shot to death. The only thing taken from Father Rivera was his last rites kit, so it seemed like robbery was not the motive. Given that this was an isolated desert area, the killer could have easily disposed of Rivera's body somewhere, but he chose to leave it out in the open. Rivera's car was eventually found at another rest stop 110 miles away with an empty fuel tank, wiped clean of blood and fingerprints. A check on the name Michael Carmelo came up empty, so the caller obviously used an alias. It's worth noting that 15 minutes before speaking to Rivera, Carmelo had called the rectory and made the same request to another priest to meet him at the rest stop, but this particular priest couldn't drive at night. It's only by complete chance that Rivera answered the phone when Carmelo called back, so it's unlikely that the killer was deliberately targeting him. On July 20, 1984, another Catholic priest named Father John Kerrigan disappeared from the town of Ronan, Montana. He was last seen jogging late at night and chatting with some local residents. Kerrigan had been transferred to the Sacred Heart Parish from the town of Plains, and was only in Ronan 2 days before he vanished. Kerrigan's bloody clothing and a coat hanger were soon found at a highway turnout. 1 week later, Kerrigan's vehicle was discovered abandoned in a remote area. The interior of the car and the trunk were stained with blood, but Kerrigan's body was never found. Curiously, Kerrigan's wallet was found in the trunk, and even though it contained $1,200 in cash, the perpetrator elected not to take it. In spite of the fact that the crimes took place thousands of miles apart, investigators felt there were enough compelling similarities between them to suggest they might be related. Rivera and Kerrigan both belonged to the Select Order of Franciscans, and in each case, money was left behind, so robbery was not the motive. Their vehicles were both found abandoned and wiped clean of fingerprints. A coat hanger was found near Kerrigan's bloody clothing, and investigators believe that a coat hanger might have been used to subdue Rivera before he was murdered. However, there was an interesting development in the case of Father Kerrigan in 2015. As part of a settlement with 362 sexual abuse victims, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Helena agreed to publicly post the names of over 80 employees who had been accused of sexual abuse on their website. One of the names was Father John Kerrigan. They also listed all the locations each employee had been assigned to during their tenure, revealing that Father Kerrigan had been assigned to 13 parishes in 30 years. Given the number of times Kerrigan was transferred, it's been theorized that his disappearance might be a vigilante killing related to sexual abuse. That also makes it less likely that Kerrigan's case is connected to Father Rivera's murder, since by all accounts, Rivera was an upstanding priest with no skeletons in his closet. 6. The murder of Dexter Stefanek. Sometime in the early morning hours of a bitterly cold November morning in 1985, a man was brutally murdered in Dawson County. Exactly 30 years later, the crime remains unsolved, shrouded in mystery, speculation and the fog of time. On November 19, 1985, a morning where the wind chill reached 60 degrees below zero, Dexter W. Stefanek, 67, of Greenlander, Wisconsin, pulled off Interstate 94 and into the parking lot of the Bad Root Rest area in western Dawson County. Stefanek had left Oregon the day before and was headed home, but his stop at Bad Root would mark a sad end to his journey. Nobody knows what happened next, but sometime after Stefanek stopped at Bad Root, someone, for some unknown reason, murdered him. At approximately 10:20 a.m. that morning, Clyde Mitchell, who managed the rest stop for the Montana Department of Transportation, arrived to discover a 1984 Plymouth Horizon with Wisconsin plates engulfed in flames. Mitchell reported the car fire to the Dawson County Sheriff's Office. At first, no one suspected a murder, nor any crime beyond possibly arson. There was no evidence of a murder at the scene, just the Plymouth's smoldering shell. Dawson County Coroner Lane Silla, who held that same position in 1985, wouldn't become personally involved in the case until months later, but he remembers when the car was found, no one suspected a murder had happened. "I remember the day it occurred. It was a windy, cold, snowy day, but when the car was discovered burning, there wasn't a body at that point," Silla said. The burned-out Plymouth was identified as belonging to Stefanek, but with no body or any other evidence of a crime. It was at first treated as a missing person case. Silla said a search and rescue team was called out to comb the countryside on the theory Stefanek's car had caught fire somehow and he had abandoned it and tried to hike across country to Glendive. Others theorized that Stefanek had hitched a ride east with a trucker, but no trace of him was found. That was the case for months. All anybody knew was that Stefanek was missing. That would remain the case for nearly 5 months. Then, on March 8, 1986, the mystery of what had become of Stefanek was revealed. On that day, William and Cynthia Shaw took some garbage to dump at a private dump site on the land of rancher Bob Reynolds, located approximately 2 miles west of the Whoop-Up Creek exit. Once at the dump site, William discovered Stefanek's wallet on the ground. Fully aware of the mystery of the missing man, the couple began searching through the dump. Then the Shaws saw it, a foot sticking out from under a mattress. Dexter Stefanek's body had been found, and police now knew they had a murder case. The severe cold of the eastern Montana winter had largely preserved the body, save for the hands and face, which had been skeletonized by gnawing varmints. Visual identification was impossible, so it actually took several days of trying to obtain dental records before the body was confirmed as Stefanek's. The autopsy revealed that Stefanek had been severely beaten, which Silla said was equated to pistol whipping. He was then shot twice, execution style, in the back of the head with a large caliber pistol. The first shot went into the strap muscles of his neck. The second shot was fatal. Silla said the cold-bloodedness of the murder was shocking. "There's no question it was an execution, and the fact they left Mr. Stefanek in a dump ground, that was pretty cold," he said. Small pieces of the puzzle started to come together for investigators. Besides having a body, other clues started to add up. One was the position the driver's seat of the Plymouth had been left in. When the car was discovered burning, the driver's seat was pushed all the way back. However, in interviews with Stefanek's family and friends, investigators discovered that Stefanek was very short in the legs, and would had to have the seat pulled all the way up. That suggested the killer had driven Stefanek's car after the murder, possibly to drive his body to the dump site. There was also the fact that the largest concentration of accelerant, gasoline, used to set fire to the Plymouth was found in the back seat, suggesting the fire had been started there as a means to erase physical evidence of the murder. However, the most shocking clue was found by Silla about 10 days after the body was discovered. Knowing they now had a murder on their hands, investigators returned to the rest stop to re-examine the area for clues. In searching the rest stop building, Silla found these chilling words penciled into the grout line on the wall in the last stall of the men's restroom: "Hot Jock shot wad from Wisconsin 1185 Saturday the 3rd. Though the graffiti wasn't discovered until months after the actual murder, Silla maintains it was likely there from the start. "I think it was there, we had just overlooked it," Silla said. Of course, who would have thought to look in the grout line of the last bathroom stall when the car was discovered burning? Current Dawson County Sheriff Ross Cannon, who began looking into the case again a few years ago, is somewhat skeptical of the authenticity of the graffiti, given it wasn't found until months after the murder was committed. Silla, however, is convinced it was indeed the killer who left the message. "I always maintained that had something to do with it. It was the words this person used and the fact that they put the date on it," Silla said. "I don't say that just because I was the one who found it, it was the way it was worded. The words may indeed have been written by the killer, but any other physical evidence was scant. There were no shell casings or blood at the scene, no murder weapon and no motive." Silla also noted that in 1985, DNA evidence was still relatively unheard of, Video surveillance was uncommon and there were no cellular phones to track. The results today would be a complete turnaround, he said. The one clue upon which the case may hinge was the presence of a blue and white Chevrolet Blazer with a camper top and Arizona plates seen parked at the Bad Route rest area that same November morning. The caretaker of the rest stop, Fred Siegel, stated he had seen the Blazer parked at the rest area earlier that morning. Both Siegel and Mitchell were sent to Denver in the summer of 1986, and put under hypnosis in the hope they might unconsciously remember more from the day the Plymouth was found burning. Their hypnosis provided little, save for the first 3 numbers of the Blazer's license plate. The Blazer was never found, but Kanan has made trying to hunt it down one of the linchpins of his investigation. The investigation at the time ran into dead end after dead end. Most murders are committed by people who know each other, so investigators conducted exhaustive interviews of Stefanek's family and friends. One person investigators interviewed extensively was Arnold Grashes of Washington State. Grashes was the last person who knew Stefanek to have seen him alive. Stefanek had been in the Pacific Northwest arranging for the transport of some cars to Wisconsin he and Grashes had invested in. Grashes knew Stefanek through his daughter, Amy Hain, who also lived in Rhinelander. From Grashes, investigators learned about Stefanek's relationship with Hain. She was recently divorced, and Stefanek, whose wife had died the previous Christmas, had become very close with her and her 5 children. He had, in fact, asked her to marry him, but she declined, citing their age difference as a concern. She was 34. Hain was the last person Stefanek contacted, by letter. He mailed her a letter before he left Oregon, postmarked on November 18, 1985. The day before his death. Stefanek's very last words in his very last earthly communication were, "I miss you and the children and the family worship. May the Lord be with you until we meet again. Love, Dexter." Investigators at the time thought Stefanek's relationship with the recently divorced Hain might provide a suspect with a motive, but that line of inquiry also proved to be a dead end. Grashes commented in his interview that Hain, for her part, regretted that she rebuffed Stefanek's marriage proposal, thinking that if she had accepted, he never would have been at that rest stop that fateful morning. The investigation 30 years ago ultimately went nowhere and the case went cold. Even a profile on national television on the then popular Unsolved Mysteries produced no new clues or tips. But while the case may be as cold as the prairie wind in winter, no one who is still alive and was involved in it has forgotten. Periodically, something will occur, like I'll drive by that rest area, and I think about it every time, Scylla said. 7. The Blind River Rest Stop Murders. In 1991, 62-year-old Gord McAllister and his 59-year-old wife, Jackie, were on a road trip in their motorhome when they decided to pull over at an isolated rest stop near Blind River, Ontario, Canada to spend the night. Shortly after midnight, they were awakened by the sound of a man knocking on the door, who claimed he was the police and that they had to move their vehicle. When the McAllisters opened the door, an armed man entered the motorhome carrying a .22 caliber rifle and a 20-gauge shotgun. He said, "I'm gonna rob you and then I'm gonna kill you." The McAllisters handed over all their valuables, but even though they offered no resistance, the man opened fire on them, fatally shooting Jackie and wounding Gord, who was able to escape and hide under the motorhome. Immediately afterward, a 29-year-old motorist named Brian Major pulled into the rest stop. The armed man fatally shot Brian through his windshield before fleeing the scene. After the killer was gone, Gord was able to make it to the road and flag down a truck for help. He survived the incident and provided a description for a composite sketch of the suspect. The only other major lead was an eyewitness who saw a blue van speeding out of the rest area around the time of the murders. This story would be chronicled in one of the most terrifying segments ever featured on Unsolved Mysteries in 1999. A potentially interesting development occurred when DNA testing matched a convicted criminal named Ronald Glenn West to a pair of unsolved murders which took place outside of Toronto 27 years earlier. During a one-week period in May 1970, 2 women, Doreen Morby and Helen Ferguson, were sexually assaulted and murdered inside their homes. They were both shot with a .22 caliber weapon and the assailant became known as the .22 caliber killer, though he never struck again. The murders were eventually tied to Ronald Glenn West, who worked as a Toronto police officer at that time. West was serving an 8-year prison sentence for a series of armed robberies he committed in Sault Ste. Marie in 1995, and received 2 life sentences for the murders. What's particularly interesting is that Ronald Glenn West just happened to live in Blind River in 1991. It's also rumored that he owned a van at that time, and apparently, West's wife once remarked that the composite sketch of the rest stop suspect looked like her husband if he were wearing a wig. For years, there was misinformation floating around the internet that Gord McAllister died in 1998, 1 year before West became a suspect in the murders. However, an obituary eventually surfaced which shows that Gord McAllister actually died in 2012. I have no idea if police ever asked Gord to identify West as the killer. West seems like a pretty strong suspect, but this one unanswered question prevents me from being 100% certain that he's the guy. However, the currently incarcerated West has never been conclusively linked to the Blind River rest stop murders, which remain unsolved. 8. The murder of Jane Snow. It's been 30 years since the Jane Snow murder first made headlines, and criminal justice officials, who were first involved in the case, say they are still haunted by it. While a second murder at Lakes of the North was solved relatively quickly, see related story. The murder of Snow at the Loon Lake Rest area on northbound I-75 just south of Gaylord has languished as unsolved cold case. It's bothered me all these years that we weren't able to catch the person who committed this horrible crime. I think about it every time I go by the rest area, said Gaylord attorney James Cuttant. 30 years ago, Cuttant was the Otsego County Assistant Prosecutor. I remember the Sheriff's Department and the state police working very hard on that case. At the time there were no detectives working in Gaylord, and 2 detectives from the Traverse City State Police Post worked the case. Cuttant said he has no theories about who may have committed the murder. You just need to follow the evidence. We looked at her ex-husband, but his alibi checked out, he remembered. James Dost, who was commander at the Gaylord State Police Post in 1979, said he also has been haunted by the unsolved case. It was one of these cases that bugs you. I certainly would have liked to have solved it and arrest someone, Dost said, but it wasn't to be. It is one of my disappointments. Dost remembered that when a body was found near Lakes of the North just 4 days after the rest area murder, it really upset the community. There were a lot of rumors flying, he said. It had to be a terrible, terrible thing for the Snows boys. I can't imagine how terrible it must have been for them to discover their mother, Dost said. We all want that murder to be solved in our lifetime, but I don't know if that will happen. John Denneny, the Otsego County prosecutor in 1979, remembers going to the rest area and viewing the scene. Snow was slashed up like it had been a frenzy, Denneny said. Both Denneny and Cuttant mentioned hitchhiker John Mgali as the first good suspect. Mgali was picked up hitchhiking about 7:30 p.m. southbound on I-75 across from the rest area by Trooper Gene Siebel and dropped off at the Waters exit, Denneny said. At the time, Denneny noted, the trooper was unaware a murder had been committed at the rest area at around that time. Cuttant said Mgali, who had scratches on his hands, had reportedly been at an Indian River bar and had a fight with his wife. He left the bar in haste and began hitchhiking south on I-75. After being dropped off at Waters, he continued hitching to a residence in the Pontiac area. The trooper, Cuttant said, got his name and an address, before dropping Mgali off at Waters. Snow's young sons had been playing in the rest area while their mother had gone into the bathroom alone. When, after a long time had passed, one of Snow's sons went into the restroom and discovered his mother on the floor. The children then waved down the first car that stopped at the rest area and were driven to the state police post in Gaylord around 8:20 p.m. The murder weapon, thought to be a knife, has never been found. I remember police searched every inch of that rest area, the median and the other side of the freeway. Divers combed the bottom of the adjacent lake, Cuttant recalled. 3 days after the murder, Mgali was tracked down to a residence in the Pontiac area, arrested and brought back to Gaylord, where he was held on an unrelated bad check charge from the state of Rhode Island. Police went first to the address Mgali had given to the trooper, but he hadn't lived there for months. The t-shirt Mgali was wearing when arrested had blood stains on it, but subsequent lab tests showed the blood was not Snow's. Mgali was eventually released because investigators said they had no evidence to charge him. 9. The disappearance of Lee Cutler. It has been more than 2 years since a pair of pants belonging to a Buffalo Grove teen were found snagged in a Wisconsin river, but even though he has not been found, his mother hasn't given up and hopes a new television program that focuses on his disappearance will help solve the mystery. Beth Freyson, who reported her son Lee Cutler missing after he failed to show up for a part-time job, remains convinced he is alive and hopes a segment on the cable TV series Disappeared, on Investigation Discovery, will help jog someone's memory. "I'm hoping to get Lee back," said Frazen, who wears a bracelet with the inscription, "Miracles happen. I'm hoping that someone knows something. It's like a puzzle, and someone has a piece of it and they don't know they have it." Cutler was 18 and a senior at Stevenson High School when he drove to southern Wisconsin in late October 2007. He left without telling anyone. His Toyota Corolla was found near the Baraboo River. His personal belongings, blankets, backpack and favorite yarmulke, were found on the riverbank. His pants, belt and wallet were discovered in the river. Frazen and friends who were with Cutler at a restaurant the night before his disappearance said he appeared happy and expressed no signs of trouble. Cutler had slept at a friend's house and the next morning dropped off another friend at a home in Buffalo Grove. Authorities believe he drove to Kettle Moraine State Park near Milwaukee, before heading west to the Baraboo area. A time-stamped admission receipt to the park was found in his car. Cutler was captured on a Walmart video surveillance camera purchasing a package of cold flu medicine, and a bottle of pain relievers. He was alone when he was in the store, according to police and a private investigator. Both medications were among items found about 10 feet from the river. The bottle of pills was empty with one pill found on the ground. Also found was a note Cutler wrote to his mother. It said, in part, "My head is too big for my shoulders. Finally, I'll be able to sleep. I know I am not crazy. I love you, Mom. Please be happy." Frazen doesn't believe the message was a suicide note. "Maybe he went to sleep. Maybe he needed a break," she said. "I really don't know what happened to Lee." Sauk County Sheriff's Police said recently that if Cutler had been in the area where they searched, they are sure they would have found him. There were no signs of the youth after an intensive air, land and river search. Police Captain Kevin Foltz said. "Divers," he said, "checked the stretch of river where Cutler's items were found. Fallen trees blocked the river downstream. Nothing could pass through it unless maybe a fish," Foltz said of the obstacles. Even so, divers searched the other side of the obstruction for about 3 miles, but no other clues were found. He said, "There were no signs of foul play and authorities say they have not uncovered any evidence he left the area with another person." Foltz declined to comment or speculate on what he thinks might have happened to the teen. "The case is open but it's inactive," he said. Katrina Englerth, 19, was one friend who went to the river to look for Cutler shortly after he disappeared. She shares his mother's optimism that he might still be found, adding, "I just want to believe that wherever he is, he's happy." Cutler is the 4th person Disappeared has featured since its 1-hour documentary-style episodes began airing last month, said Elizabeth Fisher, executive producer. Buffalo Grove police investigator Tara Romano said that since the segment on Cutler was aired, about 10 tips have been received through hotlines of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in America's Most Wanted. One tip reported someone matching the teen's description at a gas station in Texas. Others reported sightings in Wisconsin and Alaska. "Unfortunately, there are no solid leads we can follow up on. We are passing the bulletins to the appropriate police agencies," Romano said. "People are watching the show, and that's the main thing." The segment on Cutler, called The Lost Soul, aired earlier this month and again this week. It will be rebroadcast on April 3rd. During filming, Frazen said, an actor portraying her son sat outside their home reading. "Lee used to go outside and read on the front lawn," she said. "He loved the outdoors. He used to watch the rain come down. I started to cry. It was like Lee was home." To cry.